David Bianchi is an attorney who helped to write that original law, and he is joining us live this morning to talk more about it. Great to have you, David. How are you?
I'm fine. Good morning.
Good morning to you. So I want to talk specifically about this case in Viera, and I don't know if you've gotten a chance to look at that video that went out online, but what is your reaction to it?
Well, I mean, hazing is everywhere these days. So, excuse me, it's a terrible thing. There's no question that this was an act of hazing. But what you may not appreciate is that Florida's hazing law does not apply to high schools. It only applies to colleges and universities. Hazing is defined as any act that intentionally or recklessly endangers the physical, mental health of another student or endangers their safety. So based on what I've heard so far and what I've seen, this is most likely hazing, but it does not fall under Florida's criminal hazing statute because the statute says it only applies to post-secondary institutions, which are colleges and universities. Now, that having been said, there are other laws on the books in Florida that might apply, which would be the criminal battery statutes, for which you can go to jail for up to a year. So there is a nuance here in the law because the statute does not cover high schools.
David, is that because they are minors, or what was the reason for the differentiation?
No, it's not because they're minors. It's because the law that has been on the books for decades, which has been modified several times over the last 20 years, always said that it was limited to post-secondary institutions. Now, as a result of this case and some other things, I'm working on an amendment to it that would expand this to cover high schools, because it should cover high schools. And in the next legislative session, my plan is to do what I've done several times with this law in the past and get some sponsors and try to convince the legislature that it should be expanded to cover high schools as well. But there are remedies out here under the criminal statutes. It's just not the hazing statute. But I think everybody needs to remember there should not be a race to the criminal laws in the state of Florida when any time an incident like this happens. Really, the schools need to get their house in order independently of the criminal justice system. And if you do that, you don't need the criminal laws. You don't need a state attorney. You just need leadership at the schools to put an end to hazing before it starts. And I think that's the best way to handle this.
Well, David, you know, the kids are required, if they play athletics or sports, you know, they have to take all these courses about, you know, heat and you know, how to avoid a concussion and all those kinds of things. But I don't think there's any mandate for hazing. Is that something that you would like to see all of these athletes participate in before the season?
100%. I think if you did that, you'd eliminate a lot of these incidents. I've been asked to speak at universities and all around the state of Florida and elsewhere before these seasons ever start. And if you do that, there's a lot of information you can show these student athletes that really will scare them. And I think it'll cut down on these incidents. So I think it's a good idea. You don't need a law for this. You don't need a state mandate to do it. But if the principals of the schools, if the high school coaches would say, you know what, we're going to have a 1 hour, 2 hour presentation, mandatory attendance on what Florida hazing laws are all about and why you shouldn't do these things, it'll cut down on it, because even though the state hazing statute doesn't apply at the high school level, there can be civil liability for those who do these things. You can actually be sued as a student for what you did. And again, I'm not suggesting that anybody should race to the courthouse to file any kind of a lawsuit. But I am saying that if you can put the fear of God into them, they will be less likely to do these things, and you won't need lawyers.
Yeah, well, hopefully some coaches are watching this, and certainly I think a lot of people will be looking at this situation and rethinking how they start off their season. So, David Bianchi, as always, great to have you with us. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care.
Oh, very good.